I'll start this tale the way it happened, with me standing on a narrow mountain trail, staring down a pair of yellow eyes and two sharp horns that looked like they'd been carved out of stone. It was late afternoon, and the air in the high country had that crisp bite that makes you tighten your jacket and pull your pack straps closer to your chest. The trail wound its way across a ridge above a valley full of spruce and fir, the kind of place where you can hear the wind whistling through the needles long before you feel it on your skin. I was making good time, heading back toward camp, when the path narrowed to a rocky pinch point. And there he was, a mountain goat. Not the shy, skittish kind you read about. This one planted himself squarely across the trail, like a sentry. His coat was shaggy and white, thick enough to shed an entire blizzard. His hooves clicked against the stone as he shifted, and he lowered his head just slightly, enough to make his horns gleam in the slanting sun. His message was clear. You don't pass unless I say so. At first, I thought he'd move if I clapped or shouted. I'd scared off deer and even a moose before with enough noise. So I raised my trekking pole, waved it in the air, and gave a good loud, "Hey, get along now." My voice echoed against the cliffs, bounced back hollow and strange. The goat didn't even twitch. He just stood there chewing, staring me down with the calm patience of an old man who knows he's got all day. I tried stamping my boots. I tried clicking my poles. Nothing. The goat leaned a little closer, and for the first time I noticed something odd. He was eyeing my pack, not me. More specifically, the side pocket where I kept trail mix and jerky. That's when it hit me. This goat wasn't just blocking the trail by accident. He wanted payment. I laughed out loud at the absurdity of it. A troll at the bridge. Only this one wore a wool coat and smelled like wild sage. The toll wasn't a riddle or a coin. It was snacks. And the longer I looked at him, the more stubborn his posture seemed. I had no doubt he'd sit there till nightfall if I didn't give him something worth stepping aside for. The trouble was, feeding wildlife is about the worst idea you can have out there. Once they learn people equal food, they'll pester every hiker that comes along. But with the sun slipping lower and camp still a few miles down the ridge, I had to figure out a way past this horned toll keeper without giving up my supper. Well, I wasn't about to hand over my jerky and train this goat into being a mugger, but I also wasn't keen on testing just how sharp those horns were. So I stood there, weighing my options, the wind tugging at my sleeves, and the sun melting toward the horizon. The goat shifted his weight again, hooves scraping rock, and gave me this sideways glance that said plain as words, "You've got something I want, friend. Pay up." I decided to get clever. From the top pocket of my pack, I pulled out my metal cup, the one I use for boiling water. I rattled it against a trekking pole, so it clanged loud and sharp. Sometimes noise will spook an animal when yelling won't. The goat didn't spook. Instead, he blinked, lifted his chin, and took a slow step closer, like he was calling my bluff. "All right, old boy," I muttered. "If it's a standoff you want." I bent down and scooped up a handful of small stones from the trail, not to throw at him, just to toss harmlessly to the side. One by one, I lobbed them into the brush, hoping curiosity would turn his head. Each rock landed with a dry chick against the hillside. The goat's ears flicked, but his eyes never left me. That's when he made his move. He lowered his head, not a charge, more like a warning, and pawed at the dirt. Dust rose in a puff around his hooves. I froze. My heart thumped so loud I swore he could hear it. Every story I'd ever heard about hikers getting too close to wildlife rushed into my mind, and none of them ended with, "And then everything was fine." But then I remembered something from years back, when I'd helped a friend move sheep through mountain pasture. The trick wasn't to fight or flee. It was to make yourself look like you had somewhere else to be, somewhere more important than staring down an animal that thinks it owns the path. So, I turned sideways, loosening my stance, and slowly angled off the trail. I walked as if I had all the time in the world, keeping him in the corner of my vision, but never locking eyes again. Sure enough, the goat shifted too. He angled his horns to follow me, but when I stepped off into a patch of boulders and scrub, he relaxed. It was as if I'd agreed to his terms. No toll, no trouble, but don't come straight through without paying respect. I picked my way across the rocks, scraping my shins and clinging to branches that broke off in my hands. It wasn't graceful, but it worked. When I finally scrambled back to the trail, a few yards past him, I risked a glance over my shoulder. The goat was still there, planted firm in the middle of the path, chewing slowly, watching me with that same calm defiance. And I'll tell you what, it felt less like I'd outsmarted him and more like he'd allowed me passage. By the time I got around that stubborn goat and back on the trail, the sun had slipped lower, painting the valley in bands of gold and violet. I figured the hardest part of the day was behind me, but the mountains have a way of humbling a man who thinks he's in control. The trail pitched downward, winding along a ridge where one side fell into dark timber and the other dropped clean off into a 1,000-foot abyss. My boots scuffed loose gravel, and I had to keep my steps deliberate, leaning on my poles to steady myself. Each gust of wind carried the bite of evening chill, tugging at my pack straps, and the shadows stretched long and lean, like claws over the rock. I'd gone maybe half a mile when I heard it, a sharp clack echoing behind me. At first, I thought it was just stones tumbling down the slope, but when I paused, so did the sound. Then, clear as a drumbeat, it came again. Clack, clack. Hooves on stone. My stomach sank. I didn't have to look to know. That goat had followed me. I turned slowly, and sure enough, there he was, silhouetted against the dimming sky. His horns caught the last light, glowing like polished ivory. He wasn't rushing, just strolling the trail, as if he owned it, chewing as he walked, eyes never leaving me. Now it's one thing to face down a goat on a wide patch of trail in the afternoon sun. It's another thing entirely to realize he's tailing you as the light drains away. I quickened my pace, boots crunching, poles clicking. But every time I paused, I heard that same steady rhythm behind me. Clack, clack. The thought of setting up camp right there crossed my mind, but the ridge was too exposed, wind howling, no water, no flat ground. I had to make it down into the valley, where the pines grew thick and the creek sang. Still, the idea of walking into night with a horned shadow, dogging my steps, didn't sit easy. So I tried another trick. I stopped on a wide switchback, dropped my pack, and pulled out the strongest smell I carried, my little bag of instant coffee. I tore the corner open and let the granules scatter into the breeze. The bitter, burnt scent carried sharp through the air. I'd heard goats crave salt and minerals, but maybe the coffee would be strange enough to put him off. The goat stopped when he reached the patch, lowered his head and sniffed. For a long moment, he just stood there, nostrils working, tail flicking. Then, with a snort that echoed off the cliffside, he stomped once and turned uphill, climbing away into the rocks with the ease of a creature born to it. Relief hit me so hard I laughed out loud, a shaky sound swallowed by the wind. But even as I shouldered my pack again, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd only passed some kind of trial, like the goat hadn't given up, just decided. For now, I wasn't worth the trouble. The last sliver of daylight faded as I dropped off the ridge. and the trail plunged into the forest. The change was abrupt. 1 minute I had the open sky. The next I was swallowed by towering pines, their trunks black against the dusk. The air cooled fast, heavy with the scent of resin and damp soil, and the silence felt deeper than the valley itself. My boots crunched over needles and stones, every sound sharp in the hush. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see that goat glowing white in the gloom, horns like daggers in the shadows, but the trail behind me stayed empty. That should have been a comfort. But it wasn't. When you've had something following you, silence feels like its own kind of presence, like eyes on the back of your neck even when you can't see them. The descent twisted down, through switchbacks, each turn darker than the last. I quickened my pace, not wanting to be caught without camp set. My plan was to reach the creek at the bottom, where I'd spotted a flat bench earlier in the day. I'd make a small fire, cook some noodles, and shake off the jitters of the goat standoff. But the mountain wasn't done with me. Halfway down, I heard a snap off the trail, a branch breaking under weight. My heart kicked. I froze, listening. The forest held still, needles whispering faintly overhead. Then another sound. Clack. Hooves again, only this time closer. I spun around, headlamp beam cutting through the trees. For a second, I thought I caught the pale shimmer of fur between the trunks. Then nothing, just the trees and the quiet. Pressing in tight. I moved faster after that, poles tapping, breath puffing white. The trail dropped steep and slick with loose dirt, forcing me to grab at trunks to keep my footing. My thighs burned, my knees throbbed, but I pushed hard, driven by that unseen rhythm in the woods. Every time I thought I'd left it behind, I'd hear another faint clack, echo through the timber, too deliberate to be chance. Finally, I broke through onto the creek bench. Water rushed over rocks, silver in the dim light, and the ground leveled out beneath the pines. I tossed my pack down and set to work fast, tent poles rattling, stakes thudding, hands clumsy with haste. The forest loomed close, shadows thick as tar, and the sound of the creek only made the silence behind me feel deeper. As I lit the stove and watched the little flame flicker to life, I realized how tense I'd been holding myself. My shoulders ached, my jaw clenched. I forced a laugh, shaking it off. "All right," I muttered. "He's gone. Just me and the mountain now." But when the flame steadied and the shadows leapt back, I saw them, two faint impressions in the dirt at the edge of camp. Hoof prints fresh, facing inward. The goat hadn't left me at all. He'd only taken a different path, and he was still nearby. That night, the forest pressed in close, every sound sharpened by the kind of darkness you only get in the mountains. My little stove hissed, steam rising from the pot, and the smell of noodles drifted on the cold air. I tried to eat slow, but my eyes kept darting to the edge of camp, where those fresh hoofprints cut deep into the soil. The creek masked most noises, but every so often I caught a rustle, a scrape, something heavy shifting, just beyond the reach of my firelight. My first thought was bear, but the prints told the truth. The goat was still out there, watching, waiting. I banked my fire low, not wanting the flames to flare too bright, and crawled into my tent. The nylon walls flapped in the wind, thin as paper between me and whatever stood outside. I lay there listening, every muscle coiled, my hand on the handle of my trekking pole like it was a spear. Then it came, a sharp clack of hoof on stone, close enough that I could feel it through the ground. I held my breath. Another step and then a long pause. My tent glowed faintly from the embers of the fire, and in that glow I saw a shadow ripple across the fabric, horns curved and jagged, sliding past like the crest of some ancient beast. For what felt like hours, he circled. Sometimes I'd hear him sniff, sometimes just the faint scrape of his coat against a branch. Not aggressive, not charging, just testing me, as if to remind me whose mountain this really was. My heart hammered so hard I thought it might burst through my ribs, but I forced myself to stay still, to breathe slow. At some point, exhaustion won. My eyes closed, and when I woke, pale dawn light spilled through the tent. I unzipped the flap and stepped out into the chill morning air. The goat was gone, but his tracks told the story. A neat ring of hoof prints encircling the camp, looping again and again, like a sentry pacing his post. I packed up in silence, the memory of those horns etched deep in my mind. When I finally hit the trail again, I walked steady, not looking back. The mountain had given me passage, but it had made sure I understood the terms. I was a guest, and some tolls can't be paid with food or noise, only respect. Even now, whenever I lace my boots and head for the high country, I think of that goat. Not as a nuisance, not as a threat, but as a reminder. Out there, we don't make the rules. We walk the path we're allowed, and sometimes the wild tests us, just to see if we've learned that truth. And I'll tell you this, every time I shoulder my pack, I still hear the echo of those hooves in the back of my mind. Clack, clack.